And we are live. Welcome to the Onions and Flagons podcast. Today we're talking about dungeons.
Yes, dungeons, the first part of what D&D is, a quintessential aspect of the game.
Next week we're going to talk about dragons, and then we'll have talked about everything. We can end the podcast.
Yeah. 3 episodes in, we'll have finished. I can't think of a much more efficient podcast than that. But before we think about the grand finale of dragons next week, I think we should talk a little bit about dungeons. What do you think a dungeon is? What's a dungeon to you?
To me, dungeons are ever present, but they're also quite hard to nail down as being one particular thing because they really have so many facets.
Yeah.
You can break them down into sort of the more typical linear style where kind of like the dungeon I'm going to present later in the episode, where you go from one room to the end. There's a start, there's a finish, might be a bit of branching pathways in the middle, but ultimately where the story begins and the story ends is in the same place. It's predetermined. Yeah,
dungeons, a lot of people might just think it's a series of interlocking rooms underneath the ground in a spooky old temple, with some zombies or something like that. But dungeons can be so much more. They can be in a sprawling forest, they can be in an abandoned village, they can be a battle on the mountaintops, or some of my favourite dungeons personally are wizard towers or mansions and things like that, because they can offer a chance to really flesh out some of the villains of your story. And you can kind of go as creative as you want based on the enemy, whether it be a nice simple level 2-3 dungeon with some goblins. You can do some really fun stuff with how goblins might live their day-to-day lives with that. Or it can be a high-level adventure where you're storming the hilltops of the giants and you're faced against, even just simple problems of trying to get up their steps. Their steps might be 6 foot, So a dungeon can be basically anything you want it to be, as long as it's, a series of challenges for a party to face and overcome.
Dungeons are more of a mindset than they are of something you can nail down. It's more of an art than a science, really.
Yeah. You need a flair for creativity as well with a dungeon.
You give some pretty quintessential examples of dungeons, from giants to goblin layers, but even things like a city itself could be a dungeon. Whether it's abandoned or lived in, it could still be a dungeon.
Even the sewers of the city can be an interesting dungeon, or even just breaking into a prison cell in a castle can be a dungeon. Dungeons don't have to be massive. A dungeon can literally just be 2 interconnected rooms, as long as there are hazards and a goal to follow. That's a dungeon, and you can do a lot with the concept of a dungeon,
So I've got in my notes that I've got 3 distinct types of dungeon that I want to sort of break down, and these to me are the most common ones that most dungeons will fall into. There is the typical linear dungeon, there is the mega dungeon, and there is the funhouse dungeon. So typical linear dungeons are just like the dungeon I'm going to be giving to you listeners for free later on, are simple procedures where you go from the start to the end. Again, there might be some branching pathways, but the beginning and the end is laid out prior. And this is the kind of dungeon that you will find in most of the 5th edition modules. Then there is the mega dungeon, of which there is one in 5th edition, the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, where there are many different levels. You're not expected to explore the entire thing in one trip. You'll be spending the entire campaign, if not many episodes and many sessions, in the mega dungeon. And there's the funhouse dungeon, which sort of alludes to the wizard tower that you talked about earlier. It's my typical sort of presentation of the funhouse dungeon, where it's a series of rooms that don't necessarily have a coherent theme, but do have weird and wacky things on each level. Weird puzzles.
It's more like riddles and puzzles using mind over strength.
Exactly.
A lot of dungeons, can involve fighting a series of tougher and tougher creatures and monsters. Whereas a funhouse dungeon, it's about using your brain, using creative solutions to overcome.
To me, the distinction of funhouse dungeons is that it challenges the player, not the character sheet. It'll make the player think outside the box.
That's a good way of putting it.
It make the player think outside the box and have to use their own mental abilities rather than just rolling on a table. You know, if you have a player who doesn't feel comfortable doing that, then that's fine. People don't feel comfortable talking in character or having but if you can have their character sort of roll.
Yeah, rather than there being a doorway there, the character rolling, okay, I'm going to use a strength check to break the door down. It's a case of, no, that's not going to work here. You got to figure out, how can I pass this door? Do I find a key, or is there a riddle, or it could be any number of reasons, you know? And it engages the players a little bit more, you know, makes it a little bit less brain dead of, I have a problem, I'm going to roll the dice, and that's my solution, you know? The player has to approach it in their own way. And by offering problems like that there, you'll find many different people come up with many different solutions to the same problem. And that can be really, really fun to see how different people react to the same problem. You know?
Exactly. Yeah. No plan survives an encounter with the players.
100%. I have a little one shot that I run with new groups of players, and I think it's a very, very simple. You take over a little goblin camp, very, very easy. And I think I've run that with maybe 7 or 8 groups of players now, and I can promise you, every single group has completely exceeded my expectations on how they were going to approach that situation. Everybody done it differently. Yeah. Like with the fun of a funhouse dungeon, everybody can do it differently, you know.
Yeah. So funhouse dungeons, I really like them, but you do have to at least warn the players that there is an incoherency by telling them it's a wizard's tower, or it's a mad mage, or there's some sort of like. You have to like pre-tell them that it's not going to make coherent sense. You might even want to do it as like a non-canon dungeon exploration because of how weird and wacky it can be.
You're going into a place where the laws of physics no longer apply. You go into this here area and you're in the mind of a madman. Laws and sense, there's no logic, and that can be such a fun concept to play with, you know, because there's no logic or set laws. That can open it up to absolutely anything, and you can really go mad with it. And yeah, it can just be a really fun and wacky experience, and lighthearted as well. I find a lot of the time you tend not to take these ones too seriously, and it tends to be more of just a sit back, relax, laugh. Yeah, no stakes.
If you're interested in running a funhouse dungeon, there's one called White Plum Mountain, which was reprinted in the what's that one called? The anthology one.
Tales of the Yawning Portal?
Yes, Tales of the Yawning Portal. And White Plum Mountain was one of the first ever funhouse dungeons, and it has some weird stuff in it. Yeah. Like, there's like the first encounter is with a sphinx who tells them a riddle. Then
riddles are a lot of fun.
There's like 3 artifact level magic items that they can find that require attunement, and they're just absolutely broken. There's like a sliding. There's like a place where you go into a room and the floor is like so slick with like some magic that you just like you know in Pokemon with the ice when you just like
yeah your sprite stops walking and just
you just walk in one direction and you don't stop moving in that direction until you hit a wall, and then there's all these like spike traps with, I believe it's called super tetanus.
Wow.
Or you get these like permanent like afflictions that like reduce your max HP. Yeah,
this funhouse is starting to sound a lot less fun.
Yeah.
What did you call that one again?
White Plum Mountain.
White Plum Mountain in the Yawning Portal.
I ran it in my Curse of Strahd campaign, where the wizard Mordenkainen isn't given a like location that you can find him in. Really, it sort of gives a description of where you find him, but it doesn't give him a tower. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to run White Plum Mountain as being his home, and because one of the players had Mordenkainen as his like. Predestined ally.
That's a strong ally for a player to have. I got Mordenkainen in my contacts and speed dial. You know, give me 2 seconds to just ring up Tasha. She can give us the answer to this here problem. You know, some of my favorite puzzles are just the simple ones, like a little riddle, for example. My advice, however, if you are designing your own funhouse and you're designing your own puzzles, make them simple, in the sense of make sure a 5-year-old can figure out these problems, because I promise you might be running your game for a group of adults, but they are not going to approach those problems like an adult.
If anything, children might be better at solving the puzzles.
I think children would be better at solving a lot of the problems because adults tend to overthink a problem, whereas children just brain might work a lot simpler for it.
Yeah.
So design your problems in such a way that a 5-year-old, maybe not 5, maybe 10-year-old if you want a really tough puzzle. I got a little riddle for you and the listeners if they would like to leave the answer in the comments that I like to put into some of my dungeons. I'm the beginning of eternity, the end of space and time. What am I? So if you think you know the answer, leave it in the comments and we'll give you a thumbs up if you got it right.
Do you want to read it out one more time?
I'm the beginning of eternity, the end of space and time. What am I? And again, these are quite simple, like little riddles and puzzles that shouldn't require too much logic.
Mm-hmm. I got it eventually.
You got it eventually. I've had groups of players not get that one. It helps if you write the puzzle down sometimes for players as well. It can be a bit. Some people learn or can approach a problem better when they can see it written out in front of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, just when designing them, don't expect too much of your players. I don't mean that in an offensive way, but if they're just bonking things in the head with a big stick, they might not be too well catered for solving technical problems like that. But give it a go. And if they get the riddles wrong, that's why traps exist. That's why traps exist.
So there's a distinction I want to make. So I've played a lot of like what's called the OSR, the old school role playing, very like old school design dungeons, old school design adventures.
Mm-hmm.
And the distinction I would make between the mindset of old dungeons and modern dungeons is that in old dungeons were the game, whereas in modern D&D, dungeons are a part of the game.
Yeah.
So in old dungeons, there was this sort of like gameplay loop where you went into the dungeon to get adventure and loot, and then you would leave, and then you would come back with your newfound abilities and newfound magic items to go deeper into the dungeon. And it was a constant sort of like cycle of going further in, coming out, going further in, coming out. Whereas in modern dungeons, it's a lot more designed such that any player, any party of the correct level should be able to beat this in one go. And it's, you go to the dungeon, you do the adventure, you leave, you never come back, is the distinction I would make. Yeah.
That's a really cool concept of going back and forth into the same dungeon over and over again. It kind of reminds me of the video game roguelikes, where you're not going to beat this the first time you go through, but you're not going to beat the second time, but every time you get a little bit stronger, you get a little bit better, you get a little bit further, and you get a real sense of progression with that, and can really go into the whole concept of exploration as well. It's like, God, should we go a little bit deeper? It adds those stakes of, the party's a little bit weak. Should we go back and retreat, or should we just risk it all for one more room, one more floor, one more encounter?
In 5th edition, there's only been one dungeon that I've ran that players have went into and out of several times, and that was the Castle of Curse of Strahd.
Oh, I've not played Curse of Strahd, but I've heard that's a hell of a dungeon.
It is like 6 or 7 floors. There's like several dungeon layers, in the classic sense, as in like there's a keep, and there's several stairs. There's lots of different ways to go up and down. Not every floor has a way of getting to the adjacent floor. There's like servants access and main access, and you can access different parts. It's very complicated to run, and I don't think I could run it using a dry erase mat and dry erase markers. I think it's one of those things where, like in the old days, you sort of need to, as opposed to the old days, we now have virtual tabletops.
Yeah.
And that's a lot easier to run, especially with mega dungeons, sprawling mega dungeons. It's just so much easier to have a virtual tabletop take care of the mapping.
Because if you're like me and not terribly good at art, drawing a dungeon out as the players are exploring it in dry erase mat can be a little bit archaic, and it can almost destroy the illusion of the dungeon in a way.
I think if I was to run Curse of Strahd again, and if I were to run it in person, I would have the players sat along the table with their laptops or their tablets just to navigate that dungeon.
So a way we have done it in the past actually is we have a big 50-inch screen TV, and the DM will have their laptop connected up to the 50-inch screen and have Roll20 up and running there. And the players will just point to where their character is in the TV and be like, yeah, can you move him 3 squares to the right, for example? And it's just as immersive experience. Instead of having a mat laid out in the bottom of the table, you have a TV set up at the end of the table, and it works just as well, if not better than a mat, and it can be very seamless. It makes a lot less work for the DM, and less work for the DM means that the DM can focus on some of the more important things, such as even the description of the rooms, combat encounters, dice
rolling.
Dice rolling, and it frees up resources in the DM's mind, not having to worry about drawing the map out as well. So there could be some really creative solutions to how you might lay out a map.
My aspirational dungeon master table is one of those tables with the screen built in
yeah,
to the middle of the table, and you can have miniatures and you move it around. That's what I aspire to have.
Whenever I'm in my forever home, I do want a dungeon area designed. A big room. I want shields and swords on the wall. I want a big massive table with a screen built in. I want a round table. I want a hexagonal table where all the players can look and see each other, and everybody's got their own wee separate compartments built into the table. They can roll their dice. I don't know, but that's way down the line. At the minute, I'll stick to a small fold table for my D&D experiences.
Do you want to go to my dungeon as an example, or do you want to do more preamble about dungeons?
No, let's have a look at your dungeon and we can talk about some of the core concepts.
Okay, so on screen here you can see my the dungeon that I made. So in the description you'll find a link to the image, and you can find the text for each of the rooms. So I have number 1 is the entranceway through that door. The first room you would come to is area number 3, which is the Hall of Grumbar. So I should tell you the theming of this adventure. So I've had the idea that in the past where there's lots of these really cool monsters that have the ability to turn people to stone. It's called petrification. And I thought of just putting them all into one dungeon and theming it around the elemental plane of Earth. Yeah,
that could be a really good way to start the design process of what your dungeon is. If you're struggling to figure out how to build a dungeon, start with what I want the theme to be, what I want the types of enemies to be, what I want the boss to be, and you want to keep that coherent theme throughout the dungeon.
Yeah, I'm a big monster guy. I really like monsters, so generally the way I would design adventures, I would just open up the various monster manuals that I have and just look through them and be like, I want to run that monster.
Yeah.
Here's a thing in their lore that I really like, so that's what I want to include. That's what I did with this adventure.
I've designed entire one-shots based around just a single monster that I've wanted to play. I really wanted to play an Elder Brain one time, so I was like, right, I'll design a wee quick one-shot, made a couple of guys in, and they all had a ball with the campaign, but really that was just a chance for me to get to play an Elder Brain and have a bit of fun with that.
So as I said, this the area number 3 is the Hall of Grumbar. Grumbar is a god of the elemental plane of Earth.
Is that a real god in D&D lore, or is that one of your own ones?
I looked it up,
yeah, he's a real one? Yeah, cool. Grumbar.
So in area number 3, there are statues in fighting/scared poses. If area number 3 or 4 is desecrated, then a xorn will come in and attack the players. Xorn are these, very hard to describe. They're trilaterally symmetrical. So they have 3 legs and 3 arms.
So like tripods in a way, yeah.
They're like tripods. And they have a giant mouth, like a maw in the top with 3 jaws. And they're native to the elemental plane of Earth. They're really cool monsters, and I've already seen them used. I really like them, so I wanted to include that. Then in area number 2, in the hallway down, I've got the first trap. It's going to be pretty well telegraphed. You can see that there are clearly rocks displaced on the floor. There are rocks sort of mismatched above, and as the players walk, if they don't take precaution, rocks will fall. They'll make a dex save and take some damage if they fail to save. Area number 4.
I think you missed out on a really cool opportunity to include a Indiana Jones ball trap down that there tunnel.
And like force them to run down further in.
Hell yeah.
I like that idea.
Yeah. That's one of my favourite traps to throw at players sometimes. Like, oh, there's a nice little golden idol there, yeah. See who touches that. Good luck.
Area number 4 is the defiled sanctuary. So there are 4 cockatrices which peck at broken statues. Cockatrices are another one of those monsters that can turn things to stone. I just wanted to include them because I've already seen them used.
Yeah, another thing you're doing there is adding those statues the cockatrice is picking at. You're adding sort of story and mystery to the dungeon, and you're asking the players questions like, why is there statues of people here? Why are there cockatrices? The players are constantly questioning like, well, what does this mean? What could be going on? And it's dropping hints as to what the players might have to encounter, and adding a sense of mystery to the dungeon. You're telling story not just through word vomit, but by visual clues throughout. You know.
And when you reach Area 7, you'll start to get an idea of why there are so many statues.
We
can cover that when we get to it. So the next room is number 5. This is the stone cells. There are statues that stand behind stone prison bars. And then there's a branching path. You can go up to Area 6. Area 6 is just another trap. Opening the door causes a pit trap to open. D6 bludgeoning, D6 piercing. Room is otherwise empty. Room number 7 is probably my favourite room. The centre of the room is a partially petrified human acolyte named Min. He has been trapped here ever since he cast a spell scroll of stoneskin, which went awry. Min tells the party about a basilisk's bile can be used to reverse petrification. So now that the party has encountered the cockatrices and they now hear the story of basilisks and how they can turn back, you start to get the impression that the statues in here aren't just statues. They're people who've been petrified. Yeah. Which is why in Area 3 the statues were in like fighting or scared positions. Showing that they weren't just statues, they are petrified people. Yeah.
And the description of the statues when running players through it can be really important as well. These statues could be just statues of peasants in peasant clothes. Why would somebody making statues of peasants? It doesn't make sense. Why would the statue have the look of a terrified, pensioner? It constantly adds a layer of mystery to what's happening. And it can be really satisfying for the players to unravel this as they go out. It can also keep them invested and curious about the dungeon. That can make them want to continue on. Makes every corner and every room that they go through all that more exciting and intriguing.
And room number 8 is in the centre of the room stands a statue which is secretly an earth elemental. When it reaches half health, it flees through the secret entrance in the northeast corner. So again, this is going to be a very well preserved statue that looks a lot nicer and a lot more majestic than the other ones, which may sort of tip off your players that this is the first time you see a statue that looks like it could be an actual statue. Yeah. Then there's another corridor that leads up. There's a trap with gas. You can read about that in your own time. Area number 9 is where if it has not already been killed, the xorn will wait here to fight. The room is filled with pillars of crystal, quartz, which the xorn is eating. So the xorn is surprised when the party comes in. Area number 10 is the throne room with a Medusa named Haideen, who sits on a stone throne with her pet basilisk beside her. So again, here's 2 more creatures that turn creatures to stone, Medusa and basilisk. She demands the party swear fealty to her and to Grumbar, or she will attack. And if the party resists, she rides her basilisk into battle. That's one of my favourite things, is giving NPCs and enemies mounts. I love giving drow spider mounts, or giving creatures basilisk mounts or horse mounts. It just adds this movement bonus. And it's just so interesting and evocative.
And yeah, it can create a more dynamic combat encounter, definitely.
That is area number 10, and then area number 11 is the Vault of Minerals. There are various gemstones and minerals worth 4,500 gold pieces.
Yeah. Very, very important part of any dungeon, really, is the allure of loot. You know, the allure of a slightly sharper sword. You know, gives your players a reason to want to go in, and gives your players a purpose to go into the dungeon. You know.
So I threw this together in like 25-30 minutes. So can I just have your thoughts? What do you think of the thing? What would you change about it?
Well, I think with a simple dungeon like this, the purpose of this dungeon is to walk you through the thought process of what a dungeon should be doing. It is a very clear sort of beginning, middle, and an end. Dungeons are designed to tell a story. And obviously yours is the story of a Medusa that has overtaken this tomb and petrified a lot of people, and the players get a chance to sort of unravel that mystery as they go through. So obviously a big part of how you design this dungeon was you chose the monster and the villain prior, and you designed the dungeon around that there, and that can be a very, very fun process to try and go through. It's like, what kind of environment would this monster live in? So I really, really like that. You've also added the very important part of dungeons for me is the idea of secret tunnels, secret walls, and I find that can be a really, really rewarding experience for players. It gives them a reason to explore. If it's just a straight, narrow tunnel, that's boring. Boring. But if it's the idea of, there's a secret lever, you know, in this torch, and it opens up a secret path, unlocking, you know, a little bit more of the story, maybe a little bit of loot, maybe the secret enemy. Can add a lot to it.
For me, one of the difficult things about secrets is it's hard to include them without telegraphing it too much or not enough.
Yeah, there's a fine balance. There's a very, very fine balance.
Like, I like when the party chases someone into a room, they enter the room and he is missing. And that could give them the idea that maybe there's a secret passageway, maybe he's hiding somewhere, maybe he's invisible. That, to me, works. Maybe, but then, like, sometimes you might have, like, the secret door partially ajar. Yeah. That may be telegraphing it too much.
A way I like to do it, one of my favourite experiences of finding a secret in a dungeon is sometimes including NPCs within the dungeon. And I don't mean NPCs of, this is just a regular villager, but like you can have some really interesting NPCs. It could be a spooky, scary ghost that's actually just a regular person, or it can be like a sinister snake. One of my favourite ones, this was back whenever I first started playing D&D as a player, was we were playing through Mines of Fallen Delver. Fallen Delver, I can never pronounce that right. We were doing one of the very first dungeons in it. You're in this we were trying to go underneath this house, and in this dungeon there's a creature called a Nothic. And Nothics are really, really interesting creatures in the sense that, like, they don't talk with their words, they talk by connecting to your brain. And they're so interesting to include in. And a lot of people might just see the creature and attack it right away. Whenever I was playing through this dungeon, I didn't use violence. I tried to talk to the creature. By talking to the creature, I managed to come to some kind of arrangement with it where I fed it some of the corpses of other bodies, and it gave me a clue as to some of the secret loot. And if you ever play Mine of Fallen Delver, you know that there's a really good sword in the ravine area called the Sword of Talon, I want to say. And the Nothic was able to give us little hints as to go down this ravine, check that area thoroughly, and there might be something really, really cool down there. And that can be a really cool way of I find that's a very rewarding way for players to sort of discover secret loot, because we as players could have just went down that ravine on our own volition and explored it thoroughly, but let's be honest, we would not have done that. By interacting with this NPC throughout the dungeon, it gave us a few little story beats and a clue, and it's a way for the DM to kind of reward the players for coming up with creative solutions. We didn't just use our big hammer and hit it on its head and kill the creature and got the XP. We talked with it, we communicated with it, we seen a problem and we went a different route to solve it. And that can be a really fun way to go about dungeons as well. And a fun way to reveal secrets. But I get where you're coming from. It can be hard to find that balance of how do I give the party enough clues about the secret without with still keeping it a secret, you know.
One thing I want to expand on what you said. So you're right. You can use individual NPCs as ways to like tell its secrets and to find out more information, and just as a sort of change of pace within a dungeon. But another thing you want to talk about is in bigger dungeons you will have factions, competing factions based on their own like racial lines or religious lines. You'll have, like in like a mega dungeon, like the one that you ran through.
I know the exact situation you're going to bring up, and I'm well aware of the genocide of the Koatoa. I'm well aware of the genocide of the Koatoa, but I'll let you explain that. I'll never forgive myself for that.
Maybe you want to explain it.
I can't remember enough about it. I just remember casting fireball, and there was a lot of fried fish afterwards.
Yeah, so Kuatoa are massively underpowered, but they have this incredible ability, which is kind of like orcs in Warhammer 40,000, which is that when they die or when they experience great tragedy, they can manifest gods into being. And so the party just saw this like group of weak Kuatoa and just slaughtered them, and then had to deal with the consequences of a manifestation of their god from that.
The Kuatoa were of no harm to us either. They were pretty.
They're pretty weak.
They were pretty friendly. I don't know why. We did that. I think it's because we were going through the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. I think that was called, and we were like, this was like floor 4, and we were just so mentally drained. Yeah. We were battered and bruised and beaten. By the time we seen those things, we were just like, finally, just some easy things. We went a bit murder hobo there for a bit. And that goes into sort of one of the main concepts of what a dungeon should be. It's about that battle of attrition. It's a mental battle as well. It's sometimes with battles in the overworld, you have one combat and then there's a long rest. Players are getting to throw out all of their cool spells, use all their cool potions right away. Whereas with a dungeon, you're living in a world where the encounter you have in that room will have a direct impact on the circumstances of what's going to happen in the next room. You have to take this combat or this challenge on and be like, I can use my action surge now and make this a little bit easier, but I gotta remember there could be another enemy next door and it could be even tougher and I need it for this. So it goes into that battle of attrition in the dungeon and knowing what abilities you can use and when to use them. Because if you go in, let's take your little dungeon for example, you come into room 3 there, very first room, and you play with the statues a little bit, and then that Xylon comes in, and you just throw everything in that Xorn. You're like, here, take a bit of my action surge, and here, take a couple of fireballs. Here, you're a level 9 spellcaster, cast wishing it to bring it alive again, just to kill it again, Use all your cool shit and really just own that there fight. You're like, happy days, we killed it, lethal. You still have that full dungeon to go through, and you've used all of your good stuff, so it's about that kind of known, and that's the fun thing about creating it as a DM. It's you just season the dungeon with little monsters here and there, and those monsters will just bleed the party drive resources. So by the time they come to your big boss, they're already half cooked,
So one thing I want to mention is it's sort of related to what you were saying, is that sometimes you do need to rest in the dungeon.
Oh yeah, that can be really fun as well to include.
And I don't know if you remember this story, but this is again in our first campaign. There's a lot of stories from our first campaign that come up here, where we were in this room with these coffins.
I was thinking the exact same one earlier. Also, I was making notes earlier, and I was like, should I include about resting in it? And I was like, yeah, that might come up naturally. And I was thinking that exact one,
where there were these coffins, and we were like trying to organize a short rest, and we came up with the idea of cramming into the coffins to hide from the party members, and we all like rolled stealth checks basically, and we were able to take a rest without.
We were able to take a rest, but not only that, the DM was like, you all find a silver ring on each of the corpses. We're like, oh, what are these silver rings? They must be really important. It's like, nope, they're just rings of friendship. So little rings of friendship. So we got through together. But yeah, no, especially in your bigger dungeons, you're going to need to let your players. That's the purpose of short rests, and that's where some of those abilities for certain races and classes will really become evident of how strong they are. If you're always playing in the overworld and you're taking long rests all the time, you might look at a half elf or an elf creature and be like, what's the point in having a half rest? What's the purpose of this? Or you might look at a warforged and be like, sentry never needs to rest, but what's the point in that? But then when you're in a dungeon like this here, you quickly realise just how powerful and how important those abilities can be. And it can be fun seeing the creative ways players can go about taking a rest, you know. Are they just going to sleep in a couple of beds that they find abandoned? Are they going to sleep in a coffin? Are they going to try and, you know, just find a narrow corner and barricade it in, and one person's on watch while the rest of the party sort of recovers and sleeps? How are they going to get through this, you know?
And there's at higher levels there are spells that allow you to like Morn Kennan's Magnificent Mansion or Melf's.
You see, Melf's Magical Hut or something?
Yeah, something
or
like that.
Leomund's Tiny Hut.
Leomund's
Tiny Hut.
Yeah, spells like that which allow for safe rests. And those are necessary when you get to the higher levels.
Now, how does Mordenkainen's mansion work in a dungeon? I've always wondered that there, because like, I think the specs of that there mansion are like 80 foot by 80 foot or something. It's a big house.
Let me look up.
How does that work in a dungeon?
Magnificent Mansion 5A.
Because it's like 80 by 80, innit?
You conjure an extra... Okay, this is a lot of text. You create any floor plan you want. It has a range of 300 feet. It lasts for 24 hours. You create an entrance. You can open and close the portal. Okay. Create any floor plan you want, but the space cannot exceed 50 cubes, so 250 feet. Each cube being 10 feet on each side. So
Okay.
feet. So yeah, this it can hold a 9-course banquet for up to 100 people. This is a mansion.
It's like level 7 or something.
Yeah, it's
isn't
a 7 floor
Yeah,
foundation. Yeah, maybe you probably won't be using something like that in a dungeon because of the size of it.
Yeah, just use Leomund's Tiny Hut.
Yeah.
Actually, in our current campaign, our DMs found a really clever way for us, because our party's sort of going off on a big continental adventure now. So we've left our home city, of Baldur's Gate, which we may or may not have blown up. And we were sort of struggling with places to sleep because a lot of it is based off the wilderness. But the DM has created this snow globe where it's got like this little house and stuff in it. But if you shake the snow globe, you get teleported inside the snow globe, and it's got a big old house in there, and we can all hang out in there, and that's our home, and we just keep it in our pocket, you know. And we can use that there whenever we're in dungeons and stuff. But the danger of it is the snow globe cannot go into the snow globe. The snow globe always stays in the overworld. So if we all go into the snow globe, that snow globe's just sitting there, and it can break. And if it breaks, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So one person always has to sort of be out there alert, taking care of the snow globe type thing. So it gives us a chance to sort of rest and relax, but we got to make sure the snow globe stays safe, because it's just made of glass. It's not like it's magically powerful or anything. And we've actually used that in a couple of the dungeons as a little free way of escaping. And it's a proper vibe in there. We got like a fireplace. We got like a little. We actually built a sauna whenever we were in a city for a while, and we're like, we just sort of do the house up. We got all this gold. We don't know what to do with it. Let's just make a sauna. So we got a sauna to help us rest in, and we all have great skin now for it. We're getting distracted.
Yeah, a little bit off topic.
Yeah. But yeah, short rests in a dungeon, vitally important, and you can really sort of feel how different races and classes can approach that, and you can really feel some classes do better at it than others, you know.
Some classes are designed for short rest, like warlocks, whereas other things like full casters, like wizards, do require long rests.
Yeah.
And then there's things like races, like some elves take 4 hours to long rest compared to the 8 hours that take on normal creatures. And you know, it's going to depend on your party whether you'll need short rests or long rests.
Yeah.
It'll depend on the dungeon, how often you'll need to rest, how difficult it is. If every encounter is a deadly encounter and you're risking your life in every combat, you're going to have to long rest a lot more often.
Yeah, and if your party wants to be overly safe and cautious, clear it one room at a time. That's fine. But then as the DM is like, wait, this group of adventurers came in yesterday, cleared out one room, left, then come back the next day, cleared out another room. What if they come back a third day? Right, I want to set up even more traps and set up more enemies. So it can be up to the DM as well to, if the players want to be overly cautious, give them a reason to be overly cautious, you know, make it tougher for them if they're going to be having constant long rests.
Yeah, if the party is exploring a mega dungeon and
Pause.
Let's just keep going.
Yeah, we can cut that, but do you want to check the time?
Just so we can 39 minutes.
So make a wee note for 39 minutes to clear off.
Okay. Yes. So, what were we talking about?
Talk about mega dungeons.
Yes, mega dungeons. So, as you will explore mega dungeons, and as you leave, things will change about it. It's not going to be the same when you go back in.
Oh, that's
some of
cool.
Some of the dungeons will like some of the creatures. If you just cleared out an entire floor, maybe a group of orcs moves in. And they see all this free real estate that they can explore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, that's a cool concept.
Unless you like go into the dungeon and establish a beachhead by like putting in mercenaries, the dungeon will repopulate itself as factions move up, as people move in. Things will change.
Yeah, there's a really cool TV show that sort of plays with that topic a lot, actually, called Delicious in the Dungeon on Netflix. It's really, really good, but it plays with that topic a lot, where the dungeon is an ecosystem, and if you kill all the creatures in one area, you might think that's safe, but the dungeon is an ecosystem in itself. It will react to that. You've killed all of the wolves, now you have a rabbit problem. There's too many rabbits and they're eating up all your crops. Be the same. You kill all of the orcs. Now all of the goblins have free reign because nobody's keeping them in check, and now you got millions of goblins taking over the dungeon. And I'd rather deal with one orc than 10 goblins any day of the week, you know. So it can be a really fun concept to kind of play with, you know. At the end of the day, like Dungeons and Dragons, the world is alive, and if you can make the world feel like it's alive, it can be so much more immersive for your players to get into.
Another thing I want to mention is that if you are exploring a dungeon, you need to consider like other parties or other people might have explored this before you. That came up in I'm running Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden at the moment, and the party have just found this nethery spire, this giant spire from a floating city that impaled itself in the girth, and a lot of the upper floors of the dungeon, quote unquote, were explored by other adventurers. You know, there's things you can see that they were looted. There's like things that are smashed that weren't from the collision. You can also say that so they've been explored by other players. I've got other like themes and other kind of concepts. One of them is extreme temperatures, like as in like hot or cold. I've ran things where if you're deep down in the earth, you're going to find magma. Basically, you might find some. I've ran a thing with the elemental plane of ice, where there was a necromancer who was storing his bodies in the elemental plane of ice so they wouldn't decompose.
That's a pretty cool concept, yeah.
Yeah. So different dungeons will have different temperatures. They'll have different like environments.
Yeah, it can really make the dungeon feel alive and fleshed out when you can implement the environment in a way. Definitely, I love that idea of as you get deeper underground, the air changes. It becomes harder to breathe almost. Magma appears. You start to feel like earth tremors, things like that. There, you use the environment. The dungeon's not just the creatures and the traps inside it, but the environment as well, and you can make it feel like a much more surreal and alive experience if you're able to. Play with the smells that the players might be smelling, the noises they might be hearing, how the world interacts with itself. If you're doing a storm on a giant fortress on top of a mountain, you might be dealing with intense winds or rock falls and things. If you're in a forest, you might be dealing with incredibly overgrown bramble areas. So it's just about taking the environment that you're in and using it to the fullest of your advantage, and that can be really, really fun to explore in,
I have a little bit more I want to talk about, like themes
of a dungeon.
So obviously the theme in the dungeon that you're seeing on screen now is the elemental plane of earth, and creatures that deal with earth petrification. That's the whole concept of it. But I've got a couple of themes that I've sort of thought about that I thought could be good like inspiration. So one of them is a living dungeon. So the whatever you're in is a creature. So there's that's a weird reference.
So let's say like a tesseract swallows
like a Tarrasque, you mean?
Tarrasque, sorry.
Yeah.
What's a tesseract? I think it's something. No, that's Marvel.
Geometric shape.
Yeah.
Like a Tarrasque, like exploring the inside of a Tarrasque, going through its intestines, going through its stomach, trying to find the brain and the heart to kill them both at the same time. That whole thing, that could be a dungeon.
Oh yeah.
Or I had the back of a giant turtle was a dungeon, and then after they'd explored it, it was revealed that it was the back of a giant turtle, that it wasn't just an island.
That's pretty cool, yeah. And they can also be, you know, big massive airships and stuff as well, you know. They can be dynamic. It doesn't have to be a set structure in the environment, but it can be something that is living or moving, you know.
Yeah, like airborne, like flying.
Oh yeah, like I can't remember what you call them, the mind flare ships. Nautiloids, yeah, those things are massive. Yeah. They're huge, and you can have full-on dungeons, multiple floors designed around those. And they can be a completely alien and surreal experience for the players to go through.
Actually, in Waterdeep, not Waterdeep, in Icewind Dale Realm of the Frost Maiden, there is a crashed mind flare nautiloid that you can explore.
Yeah,
it's a really cool concept. I'd like the idea of including like space sparing extra planar, extra planetary creatures in otherwise simple, otherwise more grounded.
Just sprinkle it in as like a little bit of flavor of like, this does exist in the world, but we're not going to go into too much detail. But it helps the player's imagination really sort of go, oh, this is completely out of you know, our power. It makes the players feel really. It makes them realize just how big the world is that they're playing in. That's a really cool. That's a really fun little thing to do actually with your players.
The last theme that I came up with is extra dimensional. So I've had this idea for a dungeon for a while, which is that the party is exploring the astral plane, and then an astral dreadnought. Have you seen those?
They're the big massive things.
Huge creatures that patrol the astral plane, and they're one of the few things that can sever the silver line that allows people to return to their bodies when they die in the astral plane. Anyway, when they engulf a creature, they're brought into an extra dimensional pocket within them. And I was thinking of doing a dungeon inside the belly of an astral dreadnought.
That sounds
where
fun.
As the party explores the dungeon, they level up, become strong enough that they can then take on the astral dreadnought.
So they use they live inside the astral dreadnought as like bacteria to become strong enough to fight it. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a concept I had that I wanted to write about.
How would you even begin fighting one of those things as well? Wow.
Yeah, they move so quickly. Yeah.
I suppose you can make it weaker from the inside, you know. If they're inside it, they can sever some of the important arteries and things maybe. I don't know. Lot to do and think about there. One of the things I'd like to talk about is the big bad bosses of dungeons and building the dungeon around the big bad boss. If it's a dragon, dragons are going to have these things that you would call lair actions, and being able to implement that into the dungeon before the players even encounter the big bad boss can be really cool. Let's say they're going into a mind flare colony. Another brain can use its lair actions to cause havoc and trauma for the players while they're going through the dungeon, and that can be, you can add that extra level of sort of intensity, and it can make the players feel like they're almost on a time crunch going through the dungeon.
That you can even include before you reach the dungeon is a thing called a regional effect. Do you know this?
Oh yeah, that's where let's say with a red dragon, for example, anywhere within the area of like 10 miles, volcanoes might start erupting, lava sprouts might happen. The sky, you'll smell like sulfur and things going up to it.
There's I think 4 creatures that have regional effects: dragons, vampires, mummies, and dragons, hags, vampires, and mummies.
Hags are so much fun. I love hags.
I love hags too.
Hags are so underrated in Dungeons and Dragons. I really want to talk about them in depth someday. We'll do those after dragons. I wish it was called Dungeons and Hags sometimes, because hags are so much fun.
There's an adventure based around hags in 5th edition.
Yeah.
The Beyond Beyond the Witchlight.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah,
yes.
Where it's a set in a Feywild, and they're called Archfey, are all a coven of hags. It's a really good adventure. I enjoyed it.
Hag covens are a lot of fun to play with. I feel like they've got really fleshed out in later editions to 5e as well. But we'll talk about those guys, those girls in depth another day, because they are so interesting. There's so much to talk about with them. And again, hags can have their own dungeons based around them, underground Feywild kind of experiences, and Actually, they'd probably be living more in the Underdark type area as well, maybe.
Hags have their own sort of region depending on what type of hag they are.
Yeah.
So there's like green hags that live in forests. There's sea hags that live in coasts. There's burr hags which live in Arctic environments, I think.
Yeah. They're very, very interesting creatures. But we're getting too distracted with hags. We'll cover those a different day, I think. But yeah, like that's sort of the everything I wanted to talk about with dungeons. Anything else you wanted to bring up with it?
Can we just talk about how crazy the concept of a dungeon is for a second?
Yeah.
Like, dungeons don't exist in real life except for maybe like in Egypt,
a mummy's tomb or something.
Mummy's tomb, where they make it like confusing, like mazes exist, but like the concept that like in these fantasy worlds there are places that you can go, kill monsters and get loot.
Oh no!
Like imagine those were existed in the real world.
imagine dragons existed in the real world, or like elves existed. I think we can all agree we'd be much happier in the world of Dungeons and Dragons.
I don't know, it's much safer here though, but I think...
Let's be honest, if me and you were in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, we'd be NPCs.
Yeah.
We'd be the cannon fodder. We ain't gonna be the ones going into the dangerous dungeons.
We'd be the commoner that you meet in the bar that has nothing to say.
Well, I've been a bartender for many, many years now. I would literally be the guy in the tavern giving you little hints as to what you could be doing. You know. The whole concept of a dungeon is weird, but it's a shame we don't have those in the real world. You know, it's a shame.
I think that's about us done, is it?
Yeah.
Leave a comment.
If you got the answer to the riddle, by the way, I'll say it one more time for you, if you would like. I am the beginning of eternity, the end of space and time. What am I? Leave a comment if you can get the end of that. What will we be covering next week? Dragons, maybe, yeah. Do dragons next week. Make sure you tune in next week and we'll be talking about everything dragons, I suppose, yeah. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.